They thought she was just some quiet woman in jeans. Someone's wife, maybe. A hobbyist. A beginner. She walked into a high-end tactical shop alone, no flashy gear, no military swagger, no loud voice demanding attention. Just a folded piece of paper, and a calmness that made some men uncomfortable without knowing why. They laughed. They mocked her request. One of them even told her to try the airsoft store down the block. They had no idea who they were talking to. But within the hour, the door would open again. And this time, no one would be laughing. They thought she was just another amateur. But she wasn't just anyone. She was the one writing their orders. Keep watching. You won't forget what happens next. It was 9:04 in the morning when the bell above Freedom Arms and Tactical gave a soft metallic ring. The shop was bathed in golden sunlight, streaming through the tall front windows and gleaming off the polished walnut floors. The air smelled like gun oil, brewed coffee, and just a hint of burnt powder from the indoor test range, out back the kind of scent that settles into the walls of old places built on reputation. Behind the counter stood Walt Henderson, a retired Marine with a gravel voice and a posture that never fully relaxed. He leaned casually with arms crossed, telling one of his signature, old days stories to 5 of his regulars, all older men in worn camo ball caps, embroidered with unit insignias from another lifetime. And the guy tries to clear a jam with the mag still in. Bang! Right through his foot. I told him you can't fix stupid. Laughter erupted, low and knowing, as boots shuffled on the wood floor. These were the kind of men who had seen enough, and now passed time debating rifle optics and laughing at the younger generation's tactical TikToks. Then the door opened, but no one turned. She stepped inside quietly. Plain jeans, navy button-up shirt, hair pulled into a low ponytail, no makeup, no flashy gear. Just a notepad in hand, and a calm, observant presence that didn't announce itself, but didn't miss anything either. She looked like someone stopping in to ask for directions. Walt didn't even glance at her at first. Neither did the others. She wasn't loud. She didn't try to impress. She simply started walking along the display wall, studying each tactical rifle with a patience that stood in stark contrast to the buzz of conversation around her. When she paused in front of a MK-12 SPR, the long-range rifle under the overhead spot lamp, her fingers brushed gently over the charging handle. Her eyes lingered on the threaded barrel, the stock length, the angle of the cheek rest not with the clumsy curiosity of a newcomer, but the familiarity of someone double-checking specs she already knew. Still, no one acknowledged her. One of the regulars, a tall, heavy-set man named Ray Carter, wearing a "Don't Tread on Me" tee, cracked a joke. "Hey Walt, you see that guy last week who asked if suppressors needed batteries?" Another round of chuckles. Walt smirked. "Yeah, and he tried to mount a red dot backward. I told him, 'Son, you need a GPS to find the safety.'" Even louder laughter. Except for Tom Delgado, the quiet one among them, a former Navy corpsman with sharp eyes and a habit of noticing what others didn't. He glanced at the woman briefly, just enough to notice how balanced her stance was, how she didn't flinch at the laughter. She wasn't shy. She was just patient. When she finally approached the counter, she didn't interrupt. She waited. Eventually, Walt looked over. "Can I help you with something, Mom?" His voice was polite but not warm, a practice distance, like a bouncer at the edge of a velvet rope. She handed him a printed spec sheet. "I'm looking for a custom barrel replacement for a MK-12 SPR, threaded for a Surefire SOCOM suppressor, twist rate 1 in 7, match grade." Walt blinked once, then glanced at the paper. "Well now, this is pretty technical," he said, lifting a brow. "You building this for your husband?" She answered plainly, "It's for me." Ray leaned in, grinning. "MK-12, huh? What, you putting together a sniper kit from Call of Duty?" Another man chimed in. "YouTube's got 'em thinking they're special ops." She said nothing, just stood still, steady, posture perfect, notepad gone, hands relaxed at her side. Walt handed the paper back, his smile soft and condescending. "Look, no offense, but this isn't pink pistol territory. What you're asking for, that's team gear, real mission-type stuff. You might want to bring in the guy who's actually going to use it." "I know exactly what I need," she said, calm and clipped, "and I'm prepared to pay for the customization." Walt held up a hand. "It's not just about money. You gotta know how to use the thing. That SPR's not a showpiece. Most folks wouldn't know a gas block from a muzzle brake." Another laugh circled the counter. Then, as she reached to take the sheet back, something glinted under her shirt just for a second. A pair of dog tags, swinging lightly before vanishing from sight. No one noticed except Tom. And for the first time that morning, his smile faded. "Tell you what," Walt said, still grinning. "There's an airsoft shop 2 blocks down. They might have something more your speed." She met his eyes for a long second. Not angry, not even disappointed, just quiet. "Thank you for your time," she said, and she left. The bell chimed again as the door shut behind her. Behind the counter, laughter erupted again. "Probably cosplay," someone muttered. She held that rifle like it had teeth. But Tom didn't join in. He was still staring at the door. Something about the way she stood, the way she waited, had stuck with him. She hadn't argued. She hadn't corrected them. She hadn't needed to. At exactly 9:11 a.m., the door to Freedom Arms closed behind her. The morning sunlight struck her square in the back as she walked calmly to a black Chevy Suburban parked along the curb. It was dusty from long travel, with government plates half obscured by road grime, subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. She didn't hesitate, didn't fumble for keys, didn't glance at her phone. She moved with the same quiet focus she had inside the shop, like a soldier stepping through a familiar routine. Sliding into the driver's seat, she picked up a phone from the center console. One tap, a single contact. Ops coordination. It rang once. "This is Carter," she said, her voice now stripped of politeness, all business. "Freedom Arms declined. It's a no-go, not hostile, just resistant. Wrong tone." A brief pause. "Yes, sir. I have a backup supplier in play. Recommend rerouting through Depot 2 until further notice." She ended the call, eyes lingering briefly on the gun shop window. Her expression was unreadable. She didn't glare. She didn't smile. Then she put the car in gear and pulled away slowly, deliberately leaving nothing behind but a pair of fading tire prints on the concrete. Inside the shop, Walt was still joking about wannabe snipers who can't clean a bolt. Tom hadn't moved from the ammo shelf. A box of .223s hung loosely in his hand. He wasn't listening to the laughter anymore. He was thinking about her silence. Her posture. The way she didn't react when they mocked her, as if she'd heard it all before, not just heard it, outgrown it. He thought about the spec sheet she held like it was standard procedure. She hadn't flinched once. Walt noticed Tom's distant expression. "You good over there, Doc?" he called out, using Tom's Old Navy nickname. "Yeah," Tom replied quietly. "Just thinking." "Don't strain yourself," Ray joked. Another round of laughter, but it was quieter now, not quite the same. And then, as if the universe had its own timer, at exactly 10:26 a.m., the bell above the door chimed again. Walt looked up mid-sentence, expecting a regular someone asking about mags or holsters. But what walked in wasn't regular. The first man was in his late 20s, close-cropped hair, navy blue shirt tucked into tactical pants, and combat boots polished but worn from actual use, not from cosplay. A small patch sat above his heart, a golden trident, barely noticeable unless you knew what it meant. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He walked straight to the counter. Then the bell chimed again. And again. A second man entered, then a third, a fourth, a fifth. All dressed the same, all silent. By the time the sixth walked in, they had formed a clean, evenly spaced line, standing where she had stood not long ago. They didn't posture. They didn't flex. They just stood. Every movement coordinated, deliberate, unspoken. The laughter in the shop evaporated. Even Ray's smirk faded as he instinctively stepped back, arms no longer folded. Tom straightened, his body tensing not from fear, but recognition. These weren't hobbyists. These were SEALs. And they hadn't come in for ammo. The second man from the left stepped forward, his boots making almost no sound as he laid a folded piece of paper on the glass counter in front of Walt. Same paper. Same specs. Same handwriting. No one moved. No one spoke. Walt's mouth opened, but the words tangled in his throat. His eyes fell to the page, the one he had dismissed just over an hour ago. Now it was being handed to him by someone trained to walk into danger without flinching. The fifth SEAL shifted slightly, weight adjusted in a stance unmistakably military, a subtle, trained readiness to respond to any threat. Walt reached out, slowly, as if the paper might burn him. His fingers trembled. And then, before anyone could speak, the bell chimed a seventh time. The air in the room stopped moving. She walked in. Not in jeans, not in sneakers, but in full Navy khaki service uniform, rank insignia gleaming, Lieutenant Commander. Her hair pulled into a tight regulation bun. She walked with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd earned every step. The 6 seals parted in perfect synchrony, forming a path from the door to the counter. Every eye in the shop followed her. No one laughed now. Not even Walt. She stopped in front of him. Her presence filled the space without volume. Lieutenant Commander Jordan Carter, she said clearly, Procurement and Readiness Officer, SEAL Team 5. The name hung in the air like a verdict. She gestured to the rifles along the wall. I came here this morning because your shop was recommended for attention to detail and for consistency. That's why I came here first. Walt tried to speak. His throat caught again. But she wasn't finished. The specifications I submitted were for mission-critical modifications, not recreational, not cosmetic. I wasn't testing you, I was offering you an opportunity. Behind the counter, Ray suddenly found great interest in a holster display. Walt's face had gone pale. She turned slightly and nodded to the 3rd SEAL in line. He stepped forward and placed 6 rifles stripped and cleared on the counter. Same model, same platform, each requiring exactly the modifications she had requested that morning. She laid a business card beside them. We've awarded over $300,000 in parts and customization contracts across the Southeast this fiscal year, she said. We prefer veteran, owned establishments, local, personal. She looked him dead in the eyes. But this order will go elsewhere. Walt finally spoke, barely. Lieutenant Commander, I didn't know. She didn't raise her voice. No, she replied. You didn't, because you didn't ask. And she walked out. No theatrics. Just the soft chime of the bell behind her. The SEALs turned and followed her, boots silent on the hardwood. The last man to exit paused at the door, looked directly at Walt, and said, She's not just our procurement officer, she's a Navy Cross recipient, and before she outranked him, she was married to our commanding officer. Then he stepped out and closed the door. Inside, no one said a word. Walt stared at the business card like it was a landmine. Tom didn't move. Ray sat down. And Freedom Arms and Tactical felt smaller than it had in years. By the time the door closed behind the last SEAL, Freedom Arms was utterly silent. The jokes were gone. The pride that used to hang comfortably in the air now pressed down like a weight no one wanted to claim. Walt Henderson stood frozen behind the counter, his fingers still resting near the paper he had once tossed in the trash. Now, he clutched it like it meant something sacred. He didn't say a word. Neither did Ray. Even Tom, usually the most even-tempered of the bunch, just stared at the spot where the woman, Lieutenant Commander Jordan Carter, had stood. His jaw set, his mind racing with the weight of what they'd all just witnessed. She's a Navy Cross recipient, the SEAL had said. That wasn't something you earned behind a desk. That was something you bled for. And they had laughed at her, dismissed her, mocked her. Now, Walt's world was tilting not because she'd embarrassed him publicly, but because she hadn't needed to. Her silence had spoken louder than a lecture ever could. That night, the shop closed early. Walt didn't say why, just flipped the sign to closed personal reasons and dimmed the lights. The shop, once filled with photos of young Marines in dress blues and desert fatigues, now felt smaller, as if the walls themselves were asking questions he didn't want to answer. Walt sat behind the counter on a stool worn smooth over 20 years. In front of him lay her business card, the text sharp and military precise. Lieutenant Commander Jordan Carter, SEAL Team 5, Procurement and Readiness. DoD, Liaison Clearance, Level 3. The card said more than 100 apologies ever could. Next to it, a framed motto hung above the door. Judge not by appearance, but by character. He'd walked past it every day for years. But today, it felt like it was looking back at him. He stood slowly and walked over to the wall of photos. There were dozens dusty snapshots of past deployments, proud memories, unit flags, beers after missions, and brothers in arms in combat gear. His finger brushed across one old image, worn from time, a young Marine captain with sharp eyes and a quiet face. Captain Elena Moreno. She had taken over his unit in Okinawa back in '98. First woman to ever command him. He'd said the usual things at the time. She's good, for what she is. But she'd proven herself. over and over. Never raised her voice, never chased authority. She'd simply commanded it. Walt remembered her coming into the barracks one night after a heat casualty scare on a training ruck. Instead of lecturing, she'd personally checked every hydration pack, every boot, every strap. No fanfare, just action. She reminded him a lot of Carter. Except back then, Walt had learned to respect Captain Moreno. This time, he'd failed. Miserably. The memory hit hard, too hard to ignore. He reached for his phone. His thumb hovered, then tapped the number on the card. It rang twice. Then voicemail. He waited for the tone. "Lieutenant Commander Carter," he said, voice quiet but firm. "This is Walt Henderson from Freedom Arms. I just wanted to say..." A pause. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he did. "I was wrong today. I didn't ask who you were. I didn't listen, and I didn't treat you with the respect you've earned." He glanced around the dark shop. "I've been doing this a long time, 20 years in the Corps, and 20 behind this counter. Thought I knew how to read people. Turns out, I was reading my own comfort, not their character." He took a breath. "I know a phone call can't undo what happened. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know, I see it now. I see you." Click. He ended the message. The shop didn't feel like his anymore. It felt like it belonged to the future, a future he wasn't sure he was ready for, but one he could no longer deny. That night, he didn't go home. Instead, he worked. From sundown to sunup, Walt hand-machined the exact barrel she had requested, matching every specification she listed with obsessive precision, threaded perfectly for the suppressor, twist rate exact. No shortcuts, no assumptions, just respect through craft. He didn't do it to win her back. He did it because it was the right thing to do. At 8:59 a.m. the next morning, he placed the finished barrel polished, wrapped in velvet, stored in a protective case squarely on the center of the counter. When the bell chimed at 9:04, she stepped in. Same jeans. Same shirt. Same calm. But this time, the customers stepped aside. They noticed her, and more importantly, they respected her. Walt stood straighter. He didn't pretend not to know who she was. "Lieutenant Commander," he said softly. "Mr. Henderson," she replied. He motioned to the case. "I stayed up all night on this. It's to spec, no charge, not to fix what I did, just to do it right this time." She stepped forward and opened the case. Her hands moved with the confident precision of someone who had checked dozens, maybe hundreds of weapons in her career. She inspected the threads, the taper, the tolerances, and finally, she nodded. "This is solid work." Walt exhaled, just slightly. "I know trust isn't built overnight," he said. "And I'm not asking for yours. I just couldn't leave it the way it was." She looked up at him. Her face didn't soften, but her eyes didn't harden either. "Then it's on you," she said, "to make sure it isn't who you become." Behind them, Tom stood quietly, nodding almost imperceptibly. He had heard the words, too. And he knew they weren't just for Walt. 3 weeks passed. Freedom Arms didn't announce any changes. No grand gestures. No banners on the wall. But the shop and the people in it were no longer the same. The first shift came in the form of photos. At first, just one, a framed image of Lieutenant Commander Carter, captured mid-operation gear on, eyes locked on target, focus sharp as a blade, no caption, no explanation. Just presence. Then came others. Female Marines on deployment, women in Navy dress whites receiving commendations, Air Force mechanics covered in grease, working under the belly of a C-130. These weren't for show, they were reminders. Walt had quietly started rearranging the photo wall. It wasn't erasing the past, it was adding to it. Even Ray, once the loudest voice of mockery, now adjusted the range markers out back with care, setting up the qualification drills for visiting SEALs with a precision no one had ever seen in him before. His jokes, still there, had changed tone. Less sarcasm, more awareness, more respect. One afternoon, while organizing an incoming shipment, Walt hesitated as he held up a flyer from the local high school. It was for Military Career Day. There was a note scribbled in pen, looking for local veterans to speak. Focus, character, opportunity, service. especially seeking diverse representation. Walt stared at it for a long moment, then quietly tucked it into his back pocket. 2 days later, as Lieutenant Commander Carter reviewed a shipment at the back bench, Walt approached her with an awkward sense of purpose. "I've been invited to speak at the high school," he said, handing her the flyer. "They want vets to talk about service, not just the easy parts." She read the note, then looked up. "I was wondering," Walt said, "if you'd co-host with me, talk about your path, what it's been like, what needs to change." She didn't answer immediately. She looked around the shop at the new photos, the way the regulars nodded to her now with quiet acknowledgement. She glanced back at Walt. "That's a good idea," she said at last. "These stories need to be heard." Over the next week, they worked together. Walt dug through old journals and photos, reliving his deployment years not to glorify them, but to learn from them. He began reframing his tales, not just about courage in the field, but about the importance of listening, of evolution, of recognizing leadership when it walks through the door in jeans and sneakers. Carter spoke candidly about bias, doubt, and the moments she'd nearly walked away, not from the service, but from the places that couldn't see past her gender. At Career Day, they stood side by side in front of a packed auditorium. Walt spoke first. He talked about the Marine Corps, about the pride of serving and the danger of letting that pride become arrogance. Then Carter stepped forward. She didn't talk about medals. She talked about silence, about how often the loudest rooms miss the most capable people because those people aren't busy proving anything, they're busy doing the job. She spoke about respect, how it should never be earned through shouting but through skill, service, and showing up again and again with your head high, even when no one is looking. Back at the shop, something began to shift in the customers, too. They asked better questions. They listened more. Even the old-timers who once scoffed now watched with interest as Carter demonstrated trigger group calibration or explained the fine-tuning of suppressor mounts. It wasn't that they'd suddenly become different men. It was that they'd finally started seeing with different eyes. Then, one morning, just past 10:30, the bell over the door chimed softly again. She looked young, early 20s. Jeans, hoodie, hair pulled tight. She stood at the entrance, uncertain. Her name was Emily. She didn't move right away. She just scanned the space, unsure if she belonged. Walt noticed instantly. He stepped forward, offering a calm smile. "Morning, Mom. Welcome to Freedom Arms. What can we help with?" She hesitated. I'm joining the Air Force next month. I wanted to learn the basics, if that's okay." Her voice carried something Walt recognized now, not insecurity, but humble resolve, a quiet strength he once ignored in another woman not long ago. "Of course it's okay," he said, motioning her forward. "You came to the right place." He turned toward the back counter. "Lieutenant Commander Carter, you've got a visitor." Carter looked up from where she'd been inspecting, an M4. Her posture steady, expression calm. She walked over with her usual quiet authority. Walt turned to Emily. "This is the best person I know to help you get started." Carter extended her hand. "Nice to meet you, Emily. What's your focus?" "Combat systems," Emily said, suddenly standing a little straighter. "Or I hope so. Long way to go." Carter gave a small, knowing nod. "Then let's begin with fundamentals. Safety, stance, and respect for the weapon, and for yourself." They moved toward the training corner, where clear dummy weapons and guides were laid out. Carter began instructing, her tone professional, her movements precise. She answered Emily's questions with patience, corrected form with gentle clarity. And the shop stayed quiet but alert. Customers gave them space. Some watched, listening. Others smiled faintly. It wasn't a big moment. But it was. Because this time, nobody laughed. An hour later, Emily walked to the counter, holding a small packet of notes and resources Carter had prepared for her. "Thank you," she said. "I was nervous coming in, but this helped more than I can say." "You'll do great," Carter replied. "Just remember, show up, listen, ask questions, and never let someone else's doubt define your ceiling." Walt stepped forward. "When you graduate, come back. We'll have something waiting." Emily nodded. "I will." She stepped out. The bell chimed softly behind her. Walt and Carter stood watching the door swing closed. He looked up at the motto above the wall. "Judge not by appearance, but by character." This time, The words didn't feel like decoration. They felt earned. He adjusted the frame just a quarter inch. Carter glanced at him, her voice low. "Well?" she asked. Walt nodded. "I think we're on the right path." And in that moment, surrounded by rifles, memories, and change, he finally understood what legacy really meant. It doesn't arrive loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly and leaves everything different behind. In a world full of noise, it's easy to overlook quiet strength. But true leadership doesn't shout. It stands firm. It listens before speaking. And when the time comes, it lets actions speak louder than judgment. Lieutenant Commander Carter didn't humiliate anyone. She didn't need revenge. She simply showed who she was and let the truth do the rest. That's dignity. That's power. That's legacy. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you looked, or because of your silence? Drop your story in the comments. We read every one. And tell us, what kind of story would you like to see next? Should we share more about quiet heroes, military twists, real-life karma? Your voice helps shape this channel. Until next time, respect isn't always loud, but it always leaves a mark.